obtained in their common presences under the mentioned conditions as proceed from cosmic sources of a higher order, and consequently composed of what are called vibrations of greater vivifyingness. Now, from such cosmic results, exactly similar forms began to be coded in their common presences, at first from the cosmic substances mentikitzoin, i.e. from the substances transformed by the sun, and by other planets of that solar system within the limits of which the given tetartocosmoses had the place of their arising, and which cosmic substances reach every planet through the radiations of the said cosmic concentrations. In this way, the common presences of certain tetartocosmoses began beforehand to be composed of two different independent formations arisen from two entirely different cosmic sources, and these began to have a joint existence, as if one were placed within the other. And so, my boy, when similar codings of previously coded tetartocosmoses were completed and began to function correspondingly, then from that time on, they ceased calling them tetartocosmoses and began to call them beings, which then meant two-natured, and these same second codings alone began to be called bodies Kesjen. Now, when in this new part of these two-natured formations everything corresponding was acquired, and when all that functioning which it is proper to such cosmic arisings to have was finally established, then these same new formations, in their turn, on exactly the same basis as in the first case, and also under the conditions of a certain kind of change of functioning, began to absorb and assimilate into themselves such cosmic substances as had their arising immediately from the most holy Theomert Malogos, and similarities of a third kind began to be coded in them, which are the higher sacred parts of beings, and which were now called higher being bodies. Further, when their higher being bodies were finally coded, and all the corresponding functions had been acquired in them, and chiefly when it became possible for the data for engendering the sacred function named objective reason to become crystallized in them, which data can become crystallized exclusively only in the presences of those cosmic arisings. And when what is called raskawarno occurred to these tetartocosmoses, or beings, i.e. the separation of these diverse-natured three-in-one formations from each other, only then did this higher being part receive the possibility of uniting itself with the cause of causes of everything now existing, i.e. with our most holy Son Absolute, and began to fulfill the purpose on which our all-embracing endlessness had placed his hope. Now, it is necessary to explain to you in more detail in what successiveness this first sacred Raskwarno then occurred to these first tetartocosmoses, and how it occurs also now to the, as they are called, three-brained beings. At first, on the planet itself, the second being body, i.e. the body Kesjen, together with the third being body, separate themselves from the fundamental planetary body, and leaving this planetary body on the planet, rise both together to that sphere where those cosmic substances, from the localizations of which the body Kesjen of a being arises, have their place of concentration. And only there, at the end of a certain time, does the principal and final sacred Raskawarno occur to this two-natured arising, after which such a higher being part indeed becomes an independent individual with its own individual reason. Previously, i.e. before the Chut God Latanical period, this sacred cosmic actualization was only after this second process of the sacred Ras Kuarno either thought worthy of uniting with the presence of our most holy Son Absolute, or went into other cosmic concentrations where such independent holy individuals were needed. And if at the moment of the approach of the final process of the sacred Ras Kuarno, these cosmic arisings had not yet attained to the acquired gradation of reason of the sacred scale of reason, then this higher being part had to exist in the said sphere until it had perfected its reason to the required degree. It is impossible not to take notice here of that objective terror which occurs to the already risen higher being parts, who, owing to all the results in new cosmic processes unforeseen from above, have not yet perfected themselves up to the necessary gradations of reason. The point is that according to various second-grade cosmic laws, the being body Kesdjan cannot exist long in this sphere, and at the end of a certain time, this second being part must decompose, irrespective of whether the higher being part existing within it had by that time attained the requisite degree of reason, or in view of the fact that as long as the higher being part does not perfect its reason to the requisite degree, it must always be dependent upon some Kesdjanian arising or other. Therefore, immediately after the second sacred Ras Kuarno, every such still unperfected higher being body gets into a state called Tekgekna, or searching for some other similar two-natured arising corresponding to itself, so that when the higher part of this other two-natured arising perfects itself to the required degree of reason, and the final process of the sacred Ras Kuarno occurs to it, and the speedy disintegration of its Kesdjan body is not yet clearly sensed, this higher being body might instantly enter this other body Kesdjan and continue to exist in it for its further perfection, which perfection must sooner or later be inevitably accomplished by every arisen higher being body. And that is why, in that sphere to where the higher being part goes after the first sacred Ras Kuarno, that process proceeds called Okipalevnian exchange of the external part of the soul, or exchange of the former being body Kesdjan. Here you might as well be told that your favorites also have, as it were, a similar representation about the Okipalevnian exchange, and they have even invented a very clever name for it, namely metempsychosis, or reincarnation. And that branch of their famous science, which in recent centuries has been created around this question, also gradually became, and at the present already is, one of those minor maleficent factors, the totality of which is gradually making their reason, already strange enough without this, always more and more, as our dear Mullah Nasruddin would say, Shurum Morumnian, according to the fantastic branch of this theory of their science now called spiritualism. They suppose, among other things, that each of them already has a higher being part, or as they call it, a soul, and that a transmigration must be occurring the whole time to this soul, i.e., something of the kind of this same Okipalevnian exchange of which I have just spoken. Of course, if these unfortunates would only take into consideration that according to the second-grade cosmic law called Teniktoa, or law of gravity, this same being part, if in rare cases it does happen that it arises in them, instantly rises after the first Ras Kuarno of the being, or as they express it, after the death of the being, from the surface of their planet, And if they understood that the explanations and proofs given by this branch of their science of all sorts of phenomena which proceed, as it were, among them there, thanks to those fantastic souls of theirs, were only the fruits of their idle fancy, then they would already realize that everything else proved by this